get started with this session. There's still a couple more seats if anybody wants a chair. My name is Andrew Esperson. I work at the Institute for Applied Ecology. I'll be the moderator for this session. This is the Regional Native Seed Partnership General Session. I know we had some room changes this morning, so I appreciate you all kind of bearing with us. Just a couple of reminders. If you have your cell phone, if you could put it on silent so we don't interrupt the presenters, that would be fantastic. I'll do my best to try to keep this thing going along so we can get out of here so everyone can get lunch on time. For all the presenters, after you've been speaking for 12 minutes, I'll hold up this yellow annoying sign on this thing right here. And then 1 minute after a couple minutes later, and then hopefully there'll be a couple minutes for questions for the group. So with that, I'll let Marcello take over. This is Marcello DeVitis from the Southeastern Grassland Institute. And he's going to be talking about doing some work in the grasslands.
Right, thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming and attending this presentation. My name is Marcello DeVitis. I'm the director of the Southeast Native Seed Program and the Southeastern Grasslands Institute. We are an entity based out of Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. Our mission is to save the forgotten grasslands of the South, and through understanding them, that means studying them, and studying their ecology, their biology, and especially their natural history. And through active conservation and restoration, but also through advocating and promoting their conservation, meaning we run a lot of outreach and training to promote their conservation and advocating for the conservation of these habitats. So for a long time, this is our focal region. So it touches many states in the biogeographical region of the southeastern US. And for a long time, the Southeast US has been believed to be a vast, unended forest or woodland, but the reality is that it's a very complex mosaic of ecosystems, including forests and woodlands, but also including a lot of grassland and grassland-associated ecosystems like savannas, prairies, bolds, fens, wet meadows, glades. And these complexity and mosaic of ecosystems harbors an incredible amount of biodiversity, to the point that recently this region has been described as one of the global biodiversity hotspots. And this is an example from a longleaf pine savanna in eastern North Carolina, where in 1 square meter, 52 different species of plants have been found. And many of these species are conservative or rare plants, which means that they thrive only in very high quality habitats, healthy habitats. Unfortunately, of these very amazing, important ecosystems, we have lost a lot of them, and nowadays we have left generally like 10% of the original extent or amount of these ecosystems or land. And for some specific ecosystem types, we only have 1% left or even less, which is really sad, and it calls for immediate conservation action. And these remnants are also highly fragmented and isolated within each other. And so there is also a risk for, extinction vortex and inbreeding depression for all the species that inhabit these ecosystems. And on the other hand, they represent our last chance for conservation of many of the species that live and occur in this habitat. And so on the other hand, it's encouraging to hear and to see a lot of restoration attention and restoration interest, a lot of new restoration projects and activities going on in the region. But key stakeholders in our region agreed that there is not enough seed and native plant materials available for the demand for restoration that we are seeing today. And so our program is a young program. We just started like slightly more than a year ago, this seed program. And one of the main goals is to bring together these key stakeholders to improve our native seed supply chain so that we can meet the demand for appropriate ecotype seed for the restoration of these very important ecosystems. So right now, in this first phase of our seed program, we are focusing mostly on one of the first steps of the native seed supply chain, that is native seed collection. And so that at least we can start collecting and preserving these important genetic resources from these remnants. This is an overview of the activities that we have and run within our seed program. As I said, one of the focal activities is seed collection. And we are funded mainly through funding coming from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Bureau of Land Management. One of our main activities in this first phase, as I said, is seed collection, and seed collection also for the SOS program, the Seeds of Success program. So many of you are probably familiar with this map. Is the map of the collections of SOS, Seeds of Success, up to 2020. And there are a few gaps, as we can see in this map. And a big gap is the Southeast, and several states in the Southeast never have an SOS collection. And so through this funding that we received, we are planning the very first SOS collections for some of these states and other states that already had some SOS collections in the past. We are SGI. We're gonna be ourselves a collecting crew, but we are also coordinating other 4 collecting crews across the region. And it's great that they're all very experienced conservation organization with experience already in seed collection. And our plan is to make 50 seed collections across 10 states. So hopefully next year we could see something like that, new dots in the map, especially covering these states. I want to briefly touch on other aspects of our seed program because I think they're very important, like training. Training goes, we do a lot of training with very diverse range of audiences. This is an example of a workshop that we run with private landowners. As you probably know, and as you have heard also this morning from Robert Bonney, the Southeast region is a region where a lot of land, most of the land is privately owned. And so it's really, really important that we engage with private landowners, and we share with them our expertise and knowledge, but we give them some guidance, especially if they're interested in doing some conservation in their lands. And so we share guidance and knowledge about like what entails to do grassland restoration in your land, where to start, what tools do you have available, where to source your native seed or native plant materials, and all the steps. But we do also training for technicians to become a new generation of conservation ecologists. We do training for professionals who might work in environmental protection, but they might not have the knowledge or expertise to plan, for example, a seed sourcing for the restoration that they're gonna do in their land. And also, I'm very excited because in a couple of months, we're going to run, in collaboration with Roundstone Native Seed, our first seed production workshop. So to engage with farmers across the region, and we particularly want to target minority farmers, so farmers coming from minority groups, to see if they want to learn more about growing native seeds, because one of the limitations that we have is also not enough growers, because if we don't have the growers, we're never going to meet that demand for native seeds. The seed program goes hand by hand with our volunteer program. In this picture, you can see Laura Hunt, our volunteer coordinator, with Dwayne Estes, our executive director. And Laura is one of the most passionate people that I know, and she is really able to inspire a lot of people, and she recruited a lot of volunteers for the seed program. We do a lot of small collections also, not just SOS collections, but we do also a lot of small collections across Tennessee for preservation of ecotypes and seed banking, but also for small demonstration projects. But it's just two of us in the seed program, and so it's difficult to keep up with the cleaning of these collections. And so Laura recruited a lot of volunteers helping us with seed cleaning, and so far probably in 7-8 months, we have trained 25 volunteers, and we train them as they would be technicians. So we share with them, we just don't give them tools and ask for them to clean, but we share with them all the implications and considerations, for example, about the genetics, why it's important to clean very well your seed and check on your sample, etc. Because we think it's very important, and they feel very engaged. And they have donated so far to us about 250 hours of work, which is amazing. And I want to just briefly share a personal success story. Gus has been one of our first volunteer cleaning seeds with us, and they showed up every single week. And they're also an amazing illustrator. Every time they come, they study under the microscope the seed that they're cleaning. They go home and they make an illustration, and not just any illustration. It's like high art. But they also have a background and great interest in conservation, and they applied for the 2 positions that we opened for field technicians to help us in SOS collections, and they were just one of the best candidates. So it's so great that they're coming from volunteer position to actually a seasonal technician position with us. And so it's great to give these passionate people a chance, an opportunity, because in the end we're humans, and this program is made of people and humans, and so it's great to show the human side. And on that topic, I just want to conclude with this happy picture from our seed cleaning station. It's a mix of us, so staff members plus volunteers, and we just have a great time every time we get together and clean seeds together. So I just want to conclude, say thank you to everyone, and thank you to my colleagues, the funding agencies, and all the amazing collaborators and partners that we have in the region, because it's great to hear that we are, a lot of people across the region, we are on the same page. We need to do this together. Thank you.
So I have 2 questions. So I love that you mentioned art. So I'm in Alabama, and I'm at Auburn University. So
I attended your presentation, yeah.
So I just got a grant to photograph Grasslands, so I'm really excited about that. And I've also had students draw and graphically represent the Black Belt prairies. So I'm curious, the first question is, what role do you see art and design kind of playing in your institution? And the second question is, I didn't see Auburn as a dot on your map. So I'm just curious, I know we have people that go out and collect seeds. So
Do you know Alfred Schulze?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was in contact with Alfred. We have been talking a lot about doing collections in the Black Belt Prairie region. We will get there for sure. It's just that it's a little overwhelming because we're like there are so many states that have no SOS collections at all.
Right.
So we started like, obviously it was like a big funnel. We started like, okay, there are so many remnants and the species list was like huge and we needed to trim it down. And, but yes, you know, hopefully we will collect as much as possible from all these very like priority ecosystem and priority regions. About the art, I don't know, let's ask our executive director. Well, but I mean, it's obviously if there is space, like as soon as I saw gas illustrations, I was like, I'm using them for flyers. I'm trying to spread their skills in any way that I can. Also, I don't know, the CPC, Center for Plant Conservation, this year for the first time they opened an art contest, and I asked Gus, can we submit your art? Maybe I think you're gonna win. Yeah, I mean, this is how I am encouraging art. But also, there is a lot to take care of, and yeah. It's a very young program, so step by step, I will make sure that there will be space for that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How are you prioritizing species and communities for collection?
So we're trying to have a collaborative approach about that with partners across the region. So, for example, we are in conversation with the local botanists, like state botanists, Fish and Wildlife Service, regional botanists. And so we know that some of them, they might have restoration projects in mind for the future, and they're like, you know, I would love to have this ecotyping available because now it's not in production or it's not available. And we're like, great. That's going to be a priority. For other states or other regions, it's like, you know, just start somewhere because there are so many workhorse species that we don't have in storage anywhere. So it's like, yeah, okay, we might start from probably the easiest or the workers, like, you know, little blues in our region, like little blue stem, big blue stem, Sorghastrum nudans, the ones that are workers, and so they're gonna be easy to collect, easy to increase, fast to germinate, and fast to, you know, provide a structure for a native community to develop. Does it answer your question?
Because there's just so much. I'm in Kentucky, by the way, and then they're just so diverse, and to like select the workhorse versus the rare species to go out there at different times.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like very overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I mean, I'm grateful I have Phoebe on my team. Hi Phoebe. she's doing this process. I mean, she's doing most of this process, so thank you, Phoebe. Yeah.
Has anyone been looking at what's available already commercially as far as ecotype seed?
Yes. Mm-hmm. We have that list. I don't know how many of you are familiar with our region, but one of our largest seed producer is Roundstone in Kentucky. So we know what's in their list, what's available. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Francesca?
Yeah, Francesca.
Francesca. How do you say your last name?
Claverie.
Claverie.
Yeah.
Francesca Claverie. Great. Are you good?
Can you move your thing off your necklace?
Oh, you have to take your lanyard off too, maybe. Maybe you get it. Is that good with the lanyard like that, or?
Yeah, just take it off in a way from the interference of moving back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Claverie?
Claverie, yeah.
Claverie, okay. All right, our next speaker is Francesca Claverie from the Borderlands Restoration Network.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to do this presentation on our partnerships in Mexico. We do all kinds of work in Arizona, all along the borderlands, but these are projects that are really near and dear to our heart. And we also really want to encourage people to work more with our partners in Mexico and with all kinds of programs that are happening in Mexico. This is the region where Borderlands Restoration Network works. We're in this little southeast corner of Arizona. And you can see that there's all these different watersheds. We're in this really special, really biodiverse area called the Sky Island region of Arizona. So you have all these really amazing mountains that are about 10,000 feet tall and create these kind of isolated mountain ranges. And so then you have all these really cool, unique watersheds. And we get the opportunity to work here. It is separated, the Sky Islands are separated by a border, the US-Mexico border. And a little over half of the Sky Islands are located in Mexico. And then the rest are in the United States. The mission and the work that Borderlands Restoration Network does is 3 main program areas. We have a physical restoration, a watershed restoration program that puts in a lot of erosion control structures. One of our biggest issues is erosion due to overgrazing in the area. So we do a lot of rock structures. This helps slow down the water. And then in those rock structures, we put a lot of plant materials. We manage the Native Plant Materials Program. We're the ones that are here presenting. And that includes wild seed collection, farm seed collection, a lot of nursery production. And then we have a whole education component that works in the borderlands, just getting people excited and educated on the importance of restoration. For this project specifically, there's a few things that I really want to make sure are like the takeaways and that hit home from this presentation. First of all, I want to highlight the type of networking that we're doing with both Mexican individuals and different organizations. Our main focus in that is skill sharing and giving access to both methods of seed collection and plant propagation. And then a lot of this presentation is going to focus on our Agave for Bats program, which has just been the majority of our work in Mexico. And then also, finally, the importance of funding these programs and funding our partners in Mexico. This is something that there's just a lack of because of the fact that we're different countries, but is still really important to get this work done. So our very first types of projects that we worked on in Mexico, we did so kind of, not quite accidentally, but it was just funny the way the whole thing happened. We knew we were in the borderlands. We knew we were going to work in Mexico. We were excited to work in Mexico. And we kept getting calls and questions about if we provided native seed to Mexico. And as we were getting really excited about Seeds of Success and the national native seed plans and strategies that were coming out, we really wanted to be watershed-based, and we also really wanted to encourage the producers in Mexico to have agency to do their own collection, and it wasn't just like borderlands coming in and starting to sell seed all over Mexico. We just thought that wouldn't really make sense. So through that, we've worked with all kinds of partners in the region and in Mexico, from universities that have reached out, where students reached out, all these amazing biology students from the University of Sonora, to churches. There's like this radical priest that we work with who had been in Cananea and is now in Nogales, just moved to Nogales, who's like really excited to talk to the members of his community about native plants and about propagation and about how you work in community with nature. Really, really fun workshops that we've put on. Different stuff with city planning groups to come up with native plant species lists for their cities. Just so many different groups that have worked out. So since 2017, we've done between 1 and 2 workshops a year in Mexico, just encouraging people, connecting people, and doing these skill sharing workshops. Now, the Bacanora for Bats project has been a huge project of ours. On the US side, we grow a lot of agave palmeri specifically for restoration. And then in Mexico, with our partners, we've developed a whole slew of programming, both for ecological on-the-ground restoration of native plants, as well as policy work. So I love like charismatic, awesome plant, animal, pollinator partnership stories. This is such a great one. You have pregnant nectar-feeding bats, Leptonicterus yerbabuena, that come up from Oaxaca and are heading to the massive Tucson saguaro blooms. And they're like, you know, coming up super chubby and pregnant. The whole western coast that they take, they're hitting all these different columnar cactus. They hit the saguaros. They have their maternity caves. They have their babies, which are 30% of their body weight, which is like gross to think about if you're a birthing person. And then they like set their little babies down, and then on their way back, when they're heading home finally, which is like, you know, they show up in like May, and then they head back in August, September time, they're really depending on these agaves. And on the borderland side of things, we got into this through agaves. We'd grown out thousands of agaves. Agaves are monocarpic, the vast majority of the genus. They only flower once in their lives. And they're putting out all of this nectar. And the bats are the perfect pollinator. They're trying to attract bats. Bats can fly up to 200 kilometers in one night to different agaves. Incredible genetic diversity within this genus. And then the issue is that agaves are being cut down at a ridiculous rate because of agave spirit production. And this is tequila, mezcal, and the regional agave spirit where we are Bacanora. There isn't any agriculture Bacanora yet. They're just starting that because for many years it was illegal to even produce Bacanora because of Mexican Revolution politics and bootlegging and a lot of drama. But now it's legal. But there aren't farms of this, so it's all wild collection. And this is a huge problem for the bats. As a plant person, it's just devastating to realize that you're not going to see these wild agaves on the landscape anymore. So this has been the issue. So with this program, again, we were like, oh, we should be having these conversations. People had brought up the agave issue. We started talking to this in our education talks with our partners. And a group of 2 like young women that were 21 years old at the time and at the University of Sonora came up to us and were just like, we can do this work, we can do this policy work, got really excited, formed their own nonprofit that we've been partnering with since 2018. And they've been working with Agave angustifolia, which is the Sonoran plant that is in the denomination of origin for Bacanora. And they immediately went to the Sonoran government and were like, what can we do? Let's make this a sustainable product. Let's talk about how much you should actually be harvesting. Let's talk about using seed for new agricultural fields. They did all of this, and we've had so many questions from different people all over the region, like, what gave them the right to like make this policy? And it's like no one had ever contacted the government before. Like no one had even asked. And so when you have people that are just passionate, that come to you, they're like, we need you to be fiscal sponsors, we need help, we need some organizational support, we really just kind of let them take the reins, and they've done such an amazing job. So yeah, this was working with locally sourcing native seed and coming up with a sustainability certification. This was also, a lot of this funding came from Colorado State University's Salazar Center. We won a big competitive grant to do this Bacanora policy work, and Lea and Valeria just did a phenomenal job with it. We're really proud of them. This group then also, when they went off to do their whole sustainability certification, they called it FOBADES, and just engage. Like something they're really good at is just going into university classrooms and getting hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, getting people to go out and plant wild agaves in parks, in protected parks, and then also working with producers. Going up to producers, they do these organic traps for these beetles that are a big predator to the agaves. Yeah, it's just been a really, really successful group. One of the branches that this group has gone off to do now, which I think is so cool, is they have a women's fiber collective where, because the whole bacanora industry is super male-dominated and really chauvinistic and intense, they were like, well, we need women to be a part of this whole economy. Let's start using the agave leaves to turn into rope and fibers and crafts. And so they started this, they got more grant funding to do this whole separate women's economy project, which is so, so amazing and so cool. They also do a lot of rare species survey, which is great. That's funded by Section 6 grant money. And they go off and do, like, go into these areas of Chihuahua and Sonora and are keeping an eye on some really cool endangered species. The newest project that we are fiscal sponsors for, that we're also very proud of, is a whole nationwide Mexico project for agaves in general. Because of the work that the Colectivo was doing, and they were getting attention at the Agave Heritage Festival and all these different agave, like social media excitement around this plant, is the Fondo Agavero. And this is in collaboration with Sinacatan Mezcal, which is a group in Oaxaca that's a women's mezcal collective. And that's run by Diana Pinzon. They're so excited about agaves. And it's a problem with mezcal. It's a problem for bacanora. It's especially a problem for tequila, but it's really hard to change the tequila industry because of how big and powerful it is. But their whole idea is to do an agave seed bank, which I think is so amazing. So they sat down with Perrin, and they talked about seed banking and what they would actually need to store the seed and what kind of protocols and how to do it on the cheap. And we're really excited to get this going and be able to really have a network of seed savers for agaves in Mexico. This Sonoran Field School is probably the bread and butter of our Mexican partnerships. This will be the 4th year that we're putting on this field school. We used to do it in the United States, and now we exclusively do it in Sonora because there's a massive demand for it with like young professionals that are just stoked on restoration and want to learn about erosion control, about native plants. People are big fans of native plants. We do a lot of seed pelletization with them, just a lot of basic native plant restoration type stuff. This is like the main program that has Mexico partnerships that Borderlands runs that we're not just fiscally sponsoring, but is like in-house with our education. This is one of our main Mexican partners, Cuenca Los Ojos. You can see their large-scale gabions on the left. We were actually modeled off of this organization. They recently formed into an Asociación Civil, an AC, and they're just southeast of us. It's a private ranch that's now under a conservation easement that's over 250 square miles. And it's just incredible. It's a really cool, sustainable ranching operation. There's like 1 cow for every 3 miles. They do burns. They do just a really amazing job. And we're working with them a lot more going forward, both with native plants, but also with these partnerships. They host the Sonoran Field School. They've been really wonderful to work with. Currently, the 2 big projects we have going on is a grant that we just got that is one of those EJ4 climate grants. And this is a skill sharing project that we're doing for both erosion control, for native plant propagation and seed collection, and for water harvesting in the area. And this is with Cuenca Los Ojos, Caminantes del Desierto, Instituto Quino, the San Carlos Apache tribe, and the Baba Kivri High School that's on the Tohono O'odham lands. And then we also are working with Bat Conservation International to come up with the Northwestern Mexico Regional Agave Restoration Plan. We participated in their Northeast Plan, which is located around Monterrey in 2019, and we're now really excited that they're helping to get this work done for the West, for the Northwest. So one of the last things I want to plug to point out why this work is really important is like a massive spoiler for my talk is that we made up the wall and the border. Like, we just kind of made it up. It took a long time, it took a lot of effort, hundreds of years of policy work, A lot of energy went into coming up with the concept that like these are totally different areas from one side to the other. And then we spent billions of dollars making this division. And it's so bizarre when you do live in that area because you kind of just notice that nothing's really different from one side to the other. Like some people are surprised. They're like, it doesn't look any different on that side. It's like, well, yeah, it's just, we just like drew a line in the sand. These are like, this is some of the new wall that's been built on the right. And you can see these like massive gates of Mordor. And those are designed. It's like, you're like, why are there all these gates? Well, there's a river there, there's a stream. And in the monsoons, they have to open the gates for months or else the water just takes out the whole wall. So, you know, there's some things that are real, that are like natural and real. We work with a lot of those things. These are like not really real, but they're still very real in like how people are paid, how people can do work. So we do just really encourage people to think about our Mexican partners, think about if you know of any funding. I'm constantly looking for funding. It's sometimes hard to fund projects in Mexico. So please reach out to me and yeah, let me know if you know of anything. Thank you for your time.
Well, on that last point, it seems to me that there would be political support in Congress for anything that would give folks economic opportunities south of the border that would make them, you know, content to stay there and not try to hop over the wall.
I know, right? No. Yeah, people people in Mexico love Mexico. It's beautiful. It has more, we call them expats when like Americans move to Mexico, which the biggest expat land is Americans moving to Mexico. It's gorgeous. It has so much biodiversity. It's really lovely. I know you'd think that there'd be more support for that, but there's also, because of the borders, there's a lot of like, it's hard enough to get funding, and we feel that with our program. It's like, it's hard enough to get funding for our native plant program. How can we share any of that? But I mean, that's also, $100 does not go very far in our program with how much we pay people, and it goes really far in Mexico, like really, really far. Hopefully that can that won't be the case forever. But right now, it's certainly affordable to like invest in Mexico. That's a good point, thank you.
How far along is your sustainability certification? If I can do my part when I'm ordering margaritas or tequila?
Yeah. So there's two main certifications to look out for. One is the Tequila Interchange Project certification, which is bat friendly, and it's for tequila specifically. I think right now there's only one or two brands that are actually certified, but that's the big one that's been around for almost a decade. And then what we're working on with the Bacanora, which is the Sonoran distillate, is to have it be a part of the denomination of origin so that all Bacanora has the sustainability certification. It's much easier to work with those producers in Sonora because they're so small compared to like Hornitos brand is like so much bigger than the entire distillates of Sonora. The scale is, tricky. But that was one of the big conversations. There's people that are all about private industry doing it, and then there's people interested in public industry doing it. They're both really hard to navigate, but they're both important, I think. But yeah, Tequila Interchange Project for tequila, and then hopefully we'll just have the DO certified soon internally. Thank you.
With regard to seed banking, I just got out of another conference here in town. Have you spoken with her?
No.
I'll send
Yes, please. No, that would be fantastic.
Are there any challenges of bringing plant materials between countries? Is there a lot of permitting involved in that? Or?
There is. You need to go through a broker. I was talking to Granite Seeds in the seed production panel, and they have a whole produce fields in Caborca. And so I was like, oh my God, it's so hard to get native plant materials. Do you sell to Mexico even because you produce there? And he's like, no, we don't sell to Mexico. I'm like, but you're making it in Mexico. So he's like, if you have enough time, like if I have a project and I give them a few years, because everything that they grow is slated, so it just comes across uncleaned. They have permits to bring it across as raw material, and then they clean it at their facility in Utah, which I thought was fascinating. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that yours?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Godfrey, is that how you say your last
Yeah,
name?
that's me. Sit down.
There's still some seats over here if you want to sit down.
Okay.
All right, thanks. Our next presenter is Ryan Godfrey from the Worldwide Fund Canada. He's going to be talking about growing a network for seed orchards in southern Ontario.
Cheers. Yeah. So I'm from the other side of a silly made-up border. And before I talk about this granting program, little granting program that I hope will become a bigger granting program, I just want to locate myself a little bit. So I'm from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I've lived there my whole life. I've said those words so many times, but they're actually not English words. They're borrowed words from another language, the Kanien'keha language, the Mohawk people, and it's just really, I think it's really interesting. Those words are beautiful. In fact, Ontario comes from the word Kani Ontario, which is the word for Lake Ontario. It means beautiful lake, and it is a beautiful lake. Reflecting on those words in my place as a settler on these lands, I'm saying all of this to situate why I'm doing this project, which for me, I mean, it's my job. I love doing this job, but it's also me trying to be a good person, a good visitor to this land, really, is what that comes down to. So with that, I shall continue. So rewinding, but about 10 years, 12 years, I was a seed collector for the Seeds of Success program, believe it or not. This was little me. Little me didn't know anything about that. Just an ignorant individual, wanted to learn about nature and go on adventures. And I learned about the Seeds of Success program, applied, somehow succeeded, and stole a job from an American. I'm sorry about that, but they did go and place me in Vail, Oregon, and I was matched with this wonderful woman, Magda Garbowski, and we learned about nature and went on adventures in the Sagebrush Desert. We found some really cool plants. I don't know if anyone's from that region. Does anyone recognize those plants? This one's a little mimulus. Yeah, does someone know that, mimulus? Okay, this one's a cool onion that I don't remember the name of. If anyone knows it, please help me remember the name of this plant. Did someone know? Anyway, I'll keep looking. I'll try to remember. But so this is really where I learned about seeds, how hard it is to collect seeds, how much work it takes to collect seeds. And I did that for a summer, and then I said, oh yeah, I'll bring this program. We'll do something like this in Canada because we don't really have anything like Seeds of Success in Canada. And then I came back and I just didn't do that for a really long time. I did a bunch of other stuff, but then fasting forward, I found myself at the World Wildlife Fund and aligned with the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. WWF Canada put out these big goals associated with the program called Regenerate Canada. And part of those goals, when I saw this, I was like, whoa, that's really cool. That's like a lot of stuff, a lot of big numbers. And I focused in on this one in particular. And I wondered, that's a lot of area. That's going to take a lot of plants. Where are we going to get the seeds to do that? Because, we've heard so many times over and over again, you can't get the seeds. What do you want? You can't just say, I'm going to plant all those plants. You need the seeds. And, my bosses were like, I was like, where are you going to get the seeds? And they were like, you're supposed to know that. You're the botanist that we hired to figure that out. I was like, well, I don't know. We don't have them, but maybe we can grow them. Maybe we can help grow them is essentially what my pitch was. And they were like, okay, let's try a pilot. So, and then the pandemic happened, by the way. So like this all happened over the pandemic. So we did a little pilot. But the first part was I had to frame the problem. You'll all know the problem. We've heard this a million times. We need so many seeds. We need so many plants, and we don't have them. But thankfully, plants are really good at making more of themselves, so we can help to grow them in places that I'm calling seed orchards, but I know that this will be loosey-goosey, okay, marketing. Like, it's really, really what I'm talking about are seed production areas or sort of seed amplification zones. Those are kind of boring. Nobody wants to grow those, but they do want to grow seed orchards. So I know, and we all know, that a seed orchard is really for producing exceptional genetics, climate adaptation, all of that. What this project is really trying to do is actually just amplifying seeds of native plants. So yeah, I said, let's collect, let's grow, let's harvest, and distribute seeds to the right places. And let's also educate and engage the community on this problem of there's not enough seeds, because nobody knows that, except for everyone here in this room. So that's one of the things WWF is good at, is telling people, hey, there's a problem you never thought about before. Turns out they didn't even know that until I told them about it. So we went ahead with it. 2021, pandemic. This was all done from home. Mostly this is just me sending people emails. But we started with a project to start 10 small-scale orchards. They each got a small grant, and the goal was, let's see if we can harvest 1 kilogram. Sorry, that's metric. Multiplied by 2.2, approximately. So that was the goal, first year. And so I sent a bunch of emails, made a bunch of partners, and we tried it. And here's what they did. So here's where the partners are. And if you didn't know where Toronto is, that's it. This is beautiful Lake Canyantario. You could see that like my reach in the pandemic was not very far. That's as far as I could go. We worked with partners like campuses and community gardens and various groups already associated with WWF that were ready to go, ready to do this in the middle of a pandemic. So it was kind of like a on-the-fly sort of deal. But they did great, actually. I thought they did a really good job. So here's a really cool one. We worked with a landscape organization to do this, and they did this sort of demonstration garden, a polyculture, raised bed, and they also did a time-lapse series of the whole thing, which is really cool, and I wish I could show you that, but I didn't put it in my slides. I'm sorry. Come get me afterwards. I'll show you the time-lapse so you can see the seeds growing, and it's really cool. Trust me, it's cool. We also worked with an urban indigenous landscaping organization to expand their teaching and medicine garden. So we added a bed at the end to be specifically for the purpose of harvesting seeds, traditional foods, medicines, right in the city, by the way, because indigenous peoples are in cities too. We did sedges. We did sedges and boulevards. Yeah, we love sedges. Come on. So this is kind of like, yeah, they're small scale, but we're learning like where can these plants grow, and how well do they grow, and also we get some seeds from it too. Some more. This was one of the university partners, and really what I'm demonstrating here is that these seed gardens really are also habitats, right, for wildlife. So we got leafcutter bees getting in on these desmodium plants here. And we did one on our rooftop of a skyscraper. That's pretty cool. So we didn't plant the sedum, that was already there. But these rows here are 10 different species of plants that we thought would be well adapted to really shallow, rocky soils. And then harvested the seeds, and those can be used to enhance biodiversity on other green roofs and other difficult urban sort of garden situations. That worked out really well, actually. We did one in this ravine, the Humber River ravine, all sort of lots of overgrown invasive plants here. So it was a challenging situation, and sort of we're trying to smother some of the invasives while also growing the orchard on top in containers, and then those went into the ground a little bit later. So that was a pretty nifty one. And here's how they did in the first year. So lots of species, 80 unique species planted, and we did get over 1 kilogram of seeds, 2.2 pounds. So that worked out pretty well, and it was enough that that my supervisors were like, okay, we can go on, let's do a phase 2. And in phase 2, we decided, okay, we want to go bigger. We want to do bigger orchards, way more seeds. 1 kilogram is not enough to really restore much of anything. And also we realized, so in the first phase, we were really just planting plants that were already grown by reputable growers and sourced from the wild. But we wanted to get into the actual wild seed collection. And this is where we go back to the Seeds of Success program. I'm like, okay, let's support some interns. Let's get some interns involved in this too. Teach them, get them out collecting. And in particular here too, I wanted to focus on training urban indigenous youth are the folks who I thought would benefit really well from this and would be really good at it too. So we did that. And we partnered with, so first we had to do a call for expressions of interest. So this is exciting. A lot of people were interested in this, all over this range. Lots and lots of partners were like, we want to do this now. Like, we're good, we're ready to support interns. We're ready to grow or expand these seed production areas. And I wanted to give these people all grants, but I couldn't do it. Unfortunately, I didn't have this much money. This was just sort of adding up all of the asks, but it made the case that like folks are ready to go in this region. And so hopefully this is what's going to make the program grow in the future. But I then had like the worst week ever telling most of these people, sorry, no, you're like that much not going to make it. But I was able to go ahead with 5 of these partners. And here's what they've been doing. So this is, by the way, we're now year 2 of the second phase. So they've done 1 year. In some cases, that was just seed collection. In some cases, they were expanding their orchards. So this is one where we're getting into the landscape horticulture industrial complex here. So Ontario has one really big nursery that almost all landscapers go there, get their plants, plant them in gardens. And they don't have any native plants. So now they do. So now they've got about 20 species of native plants here for seed production. And they're going to be able to add that to their catalog. So all the landscapers in the area are going to have access to these plants. And hopefully they'll be able to get all over the place from this one. Here is a partnership we're doing with an academic institution that is collecting seeds from one of the rarest ecosystems in Ontario, which is the tallgrass prairie and black oak savanna sort of complex. There's actually a person in here somewhere. They sent me this picture and were like, see if you can find me. Like, can you? I actually don't even know where they are. They're somewhere there's a person amongst this tall grass, just to show how tall that is. So they did a lot of seed collecting this year. And then this was a partnership with Aamjiwnaang First Nation. And they did a lot of seed collecting in and around their First Nation territory. They really knocked it out of the park, actually. Oh, and then here were our seed collecting interns, which again I mentioned. These are part of an urban indigenous sort of collaborative. And so they learned about seed collecting, they learned about cleaning, identification, but they also grew food gardens and medicine gardens and assisted with ceremony and community events, which was amazing. That was all their idea, and it was great. It was fantastic. And so here's where we're at so far. I wanted to collect 10 kilograms of seeds, and so far they've already gone way over this collection, and most of that came from the folks at Aamjiwnaang. So thanks to them. And finally, what's next for this? So I've got another year. I finally get to go out in the field. I'm not going to be behind a desk anymore. This summer I'm going to get to go out to field sites and see these orchards and hang out with these amazing folks. And then currently in the works to try to plan a next phase for this. I need to find some money to do that first, but yeah, if possible, we're just going to do more of all of that. And with that, I'd just like to thank plants for being amazing. These are my plants on my balcony, my little downtown urban balcony that I hang out with every day. And yeah, like they're the best. They're my real bosses, actually. The plants are who I report to. thanks to all the growers. So these are growers in Southern Ontario. They're amazing. But if there are any growers in this room too, you're amazing. I think you're the best people. And we wouldn't be able to do any of our work without you. And then thanks to lots and lots of different people who assisted and helped out making this project happen. Yeah, cheers. And thanks to all of you for listening. I'll take questions. Yeah?
It's impressive that you were able to recruit so much support pretty quickly, especially like in terms of universities and garden clubs. What kind of agreements did you have with all those groups? Were you have writing, or were you?
Yeah, good point. So yes, there were formal agreements with all of those. Many of them were partners that were already in the WWF network. So the campuses in particular, we'd already done a bunch of work with them. Some of them, in fact, had already grown pollinator gardens as part of a different grant. So it was pretty easy to get them in. But a lot of the other partnerships, like the indigenous partnerships, it took work, it took time, and a lot of conversations, a lot of back and forth. That's like a lot of my job. Most of my job is just like facilitating that paperwork, emails. Yeah.
Do you have like a signed MOU with different like duties?
Yeah, we do. There's a whole agreement process, and it's complicated, but we made it work. Yeah.
Somewhat related, I'm curious about the agreements between a nonprofit transferring seed to for-profit, and do you see that as strategic? You just gave it to them, or
Yeah. No, this is a sneaky, really important question, because at first, when I said we had to partner with growers and for-profit organizations, that's not usually what WWF does. But I just made the argument that growers are really important allies in this work, and even if they're making their livelihoods off of this, we can't do this work without them. So we need to find some kind of way. So the way that we ended up doing it was with actually contract agreements. So we essentially, in the paperwork, we treated those people as contractors, and building or expanding the seed orchard was the thing that they were contracted to do. But on paper, their deliverables and like how I count the impact is exactly the same as with a grantee. So that worked out.
Were there any financial arrangements? Were they paying you for the seed or anything? Or
So if they did need to pay for labor for the seed collection or any of that got covered in the contract. So we were able to write all that in. So anything associated with implementing or expanding or managing the seed orchard was all part of the contract agreement. That's how that worked. So yeah, and a lot of the growers said that was unique and interesting. It's hard for them to get grants or to get funds for that kind of stuff. And a lot of them wanted to do this work, but it's not part of their day-to-day operations. So it's hard to expand just while they're doing all their other stuff too.
So they're giving all the seed back to you and you're paying for it, or are they keeping it and selling?
So they could do whatever they want with the seed. I just wanted to know how much they produced. We did request some for like seed packets, giveaways, incentives, that kind of stuff. But the seed is theirs and the seed orchard is theirs. We just wanted to count the impact. That was the only thing in the agreement. Yeah.
Hi, well, you're calling everything an orchard, which is great. But are you growing woody species too?
Yeah, I had a good conversation about that earlier. That was part of phase 3. We really want to get into that. It was the timelines for this. The funder that I had, they had the short deliverable timelines, and I was worried that if we did stuff with woody species, we might not get a harvest. We might not get any numbers within the timeline. So for the next chapter, I'm hoping to go longer timelines and definitely include woody species. Yeah. Cheers. So those were part of the first phase, which means we sourced those from a variety of different native plant nurseries they had already done the seed collecting. But sedges are the toughest. There's so many of them, so many different species, and very few are in production at nurseries and whatnot. So we had a relatively small palette to work with and identified that as something that we want to go out and collect more of. Yeah. Not in the first phase. It was more of like a sort of proof of concept using already grown plants. In the second phase and going forward, we're doing the collection as well.
From the plants that you're planting into those areas, and
It's all connected. So each partner, basically, in evaluating which partners to work with, I would ask them, how do you want to use the seeds? So the First Nations, for example, they wanted to use the seeds to do restoration on their First Nation. Great, you've got a plan, wonderful. For the nursery growers, their plan was to provide the seeds to landscapers and whatnot. So it was, I don't determine where the seeds go, I just want to know that they're going somewhere, and please count the mass.
However, ultimately, the mission is to restore like millions of hectares.
That's the plan. Scale it up. Yeah.
Sorry, I have one more quick question.
Yeah, of course.
The pilot program, was that funded by the organization that you work for, or did you grant funds for that?
So the whole, both of these phases was funded by a single funder, which is these guys here. They're a corporate funder who, wanted to do some good and gave WWF some cash. They actually wanted to help pollinators. And I was like, well, to help pollinators, we need seeds, so can we do that? And they were like, sure. Thanks.
There's some seats if folks want to come sit down. No? Okay. All right, our next presenter is Francesca Kilkenny from the Forest Service and the Rocky Mountain Research Station, and he'll be talking about seeding evaluation and experimental design strategies.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. So this is going to be a little bit different of a talk than the last three you've heard. So this is, first of all, it's a nascent partnership, so we're building it. And it's more focused on restoration specifically, and then kind of more of these general partnerships that have been talked about. And because it's so nascent, it's going to be a lot of conceptual things as opposed to concrete work that has already been done. All right, so a lot of you have probably seen something like this. This is adaptive management, and we all strive to be doing adaptive management. And the idea is we plan, we do, we implement, we learn, and then we take that learning and we plug it back into our planning and design and implementation, right? Except, how do we actually do this? This figure is very simple, and we think, oh, that's great, cool concept. But there's a lot of questions we might have, right, on how to actually implement this. So these are just a few of them, just some, So what I would argue is maybe we should start with trying to understand what we're trying to do, right? So with conservation, one argument I might have about what we're actually trying to achieve is to either preserve something in some sort of ideal state or to restore it back to a state. And so an ecological concept that can be useful in this case is the idea of ecological states, ecological thresholds, and then ecological transitions. So say, for example, we were trying to do some restoration, and there was a new system state, and we wanted to move it back to sort of the initial state. This would be a transition that we would be. And so we would try to overcome this ecological threshold. So, and that's described as sort of the difficulty or energy needed to go from one ecological state, stable state, to another. And the way these things are described really is kind of these troughs, right? It's like the system settles into a state, and then it takes energy to go over that hill. So just keep that in mind. But as things are changing, right, we kind of have to maybe complexify this concept a little bit. So we have an ideal state up here. This is kind of where we would like to be. And then we have a degraded state. And maybe we can only get to an acceptable state because the amount of energy and effort it takes to get back to this ideal state is fairly difficult, right? And so we get to this acceptable state because the threshold that we have to overcome is maybe a little easier. But I would argue maybe we could think about this in kind of a different way. So maybe just flip it on its head, right? So I would say, well, what if we think about those states, as opposed to thinking of them as troughs that they're settling into, what if we think of them as more optimal assemblages, right? Things that are perhaps more stable, they're more functional, more diverse, that kind of thing. And that they're these sort of suboptimal assemblages that we move through. And that's partly why it's difficult to move through them, right? That's why they're unstable. And once we look at it this way, this is kind of flipping the ecological perspective on its head, this actually goes into some concepts from evolutionary biology. And in evolutionary biology, it was actually sort of one of the original inspirations for adaptive management, right? It's adaptive management. It's like evolutionary management. And so once we've sort of flipped it on its head, we can kind of go to this idea of an adaptive landscape. So Sewell Wright was an evolutionary biologist in the early 20th century, and he generated this concept of the adaptive landscape. And the idea is you have trait combinations, right? So you have two traits, for example, body size and like bill length or something. And it's that combination that has a fitness. And so we can think of these combinations as sort of maybe these hills or valleys, right? And so in a case when you have a hill, you have a set of traits that are more fit, and that combination is more fit. But when we sort of think about it in a landscape level, we can also think about it in the sense that some hills are higher than other hills. So there's some combinations that have more fitness. And the reason why they stay in that state is because if that trait combination kind of moves off the hill, then it loses fitness and sort of either has to be selected back towards that. And the chances of actually moving over to another hill that may even have higher fitness are very low. So how do we think about this in actual restoration practice? Well, we can actually think of our techniques as traits, as kind of a trait combination, right? So we have technique combinations. And these can be optimal technique combinations or maybe less optimal technique combinations. So in this case, we have a situation where we might have an optimal set of techniques, and that's based off of current understanding. And there's this area of sort of low optimality in between another possible combination that might be more optimal, but we just don't know how to get across that barrier. And so we have to cross this region to sort of get to these more optimal techniques. So how do we do that? How do we really practice adaptive management? Well, I would argue that we kind of have this business as usual adaptive management style, where we do a lot of incremental improvements. We move marginally to more optimal practices over time. And so here you could kind of represent it as the width, you know, so over time we have this growing amount of knowledge, right? But we're maybe, we've sort of originally on this optimal peak, kind of local optimal peak, but it takes a long time to find another one, and it may not be that much better, right? But what we could do is if we really amped up the experimentation, right? Did a lot of experimentation, tried really interesting things, you know, put a lot of different stuff out there and sort of widened the breadth of our search. Maybe we can, first of all, get to those kind of local peaks faster. But we also might be able to find, we have these chances of finding things that are way better, right? And so if we can increase that rate, and if we do find things that are way better, well, maybe we can get into a different business as usual state, right, and sit there for a while. And then also, now that we've learned a lot, we can maybe have sort of continued directed experimentation using previous lessons to sort of direct the searches towards areas of practice that are likely to be more fruitful. So I've just talked to you, kind of thrown half my talk into a concept, right? So what is our actual partnership? So we're seeding, evaluation, and experimental design strategies, SEEDS, and we're focused on the Great Basin of the United States. And the Great Basin has a lot of impacts and pressures on it. So a lot of it's fire. This is the area of fire that has burned in the last 20 years. There's a long history of grazing, and so that's affected these systems. There's also annual grass invasions like cheatgrass, which interacts with the fire cycle and increases fire frequency. And what this has done is it's created these departures from kind of the previous vegetation state and into these different states. So here you have all this orange, and that's areas of high vegetation departure from previous reference states. And so the land management agencies, the BLM in particular, have done a lot of seeding, a lot of post-fire seeding to try to rehabilitate and revegetate these areas. But these practices have actually, are kind of in that business of usual framework. So that, you know, there have been some variation and we've learned some things over time, but there hasn't been a lot of different change and variation in treatment types. So this is kind of one example, just looking at like how many new species per treatment are used per year. And we're in a system where this has been done for a long time, so we have the opportunity to add new species. And in this case, it really hasn't been done. And a lot of and this is from information that's just from plans, not from actual implementation necessarily. But what I would argue is that we actually have a lot of opportunity in this case to add and try a whole bunch of new species in these contexts. And there's a whole bunch of different techniques that we could look at. So site preparation, seeding method, seeding timing, seeding rate, species mix, the origin of the seeds, right? Another way we can kind of think of this is in a conceptual and sort of a goal-oriented way. Like, how much do we know about a given goal that we're trying to achieve, right? So in this system, I would argue we know a lot about how to get forage production, right? But we know less, perhaps, about, you know, resilience to wildfire or biodiversity and habitat reconstruction, and even less about carbon sequestration, water capture, and other ecosystem services. And to kind of illustrate this, this is some work I've done with a postdoc of mine in the Tintic Valley of Utah. And we kind of looked at different techniques and how they have achieved different goals. So we have perennial cover, and that could be like, say, a proxy for soil stabilization, for example. Non-annual weed cover, so, you know, invasive suppression. We looked at perennial forb cover, and that's really looking at the facilitation of non-seeded species. And then similarity to reference conditions. So are we pushing these systems into successional trajectories that are where we want them to go? So these are conventional seed mixes, and these conventional seed mixes for, you know, almost 100 years have had these non-native species in the mix. Well, and something that's actually been very rare is actually to just do a native-only seed mix. And in this case, it's one of the few studies that's actually looked at this. We can actually push these systems into maybe more similarity to reference conditions and actually facilitate new biodiversity. All right, so we have this standard track, and we recommend, you know, continuing to perform treatments with incremental changes, right? But we want to add an experimental track. So this is to embed wide-ranging and rapid experiments, use kind of the lessons learned to target more fruitful techniques. So kind of add this track into it. And so what is the scale we want to do this at? So standard practice in this region, these treatments are done at 1,000 acres scale, right? So they're large scale. Because they're large scale, they're long term, but also because they're large and because of, you know, for a lot of other reasons, it's kind of a slow learning process. And the science in the region has really done a lot of work at kind of these smaller scales, right? So smaller scale studies, but they're necessarily short term. There's like edge effects and things like that that we can't, you know, so we can't really keep these in a long-term manner. But there is some rapid learning. But a more uncommon study type is kind of this, you know, like say 25 to 100 acres. And they're big enough to capture some of these large scale aspects of the large treatments. And so they can be long term, but they're small enough that we can maybe get rapid learning. So I would argue that there's kind of a sweet spot here. And of course we can learn from these other ones, right? And it can be done. So the study I showed you about, you know, achieving goals, this is how we did it. We actually put a bunch of blocks out here. I think it's about 96 acres or so that we installed, or that were installed. And so just to say that this is doable. So what's the idea? So right now we're developing kind of a master study design, and this is kind of gonna guide the projects going forward. And what that'll do is guide these co-produced kind of preloaded projects designs that we're gonna design with stakeholders. And so they'll be ready for when fire happens. And then when the fire happens, we'll have the opportunity to sort of work with the BLM ESR teams or Forest Service bear teams and get these leave areas designated. And all we're asking is just don't do anything there, right? And then, and so then we can embed the treatments, and we'll go in, put in these implemented treatments. And the we is a set of managers and researchers that are working together to do this. And then we'll monitor, and we're trying to be a completist, right? We want to go soil, plants, insects, birds, mammals, climate, weather, et cetera. And then that'll feed back into the master study design and feed back into these projects. All right, so ultimately, we want to keep this standard track and then add this experimental track and try to create these linkages between the two so that we can have really true adaptive management. And of course, this takes partners. So these are all the institutions of the authors of this particular talk, but these are other folks that we've either approached or are currently working with. And we really want to expand this, and we're very interested in anybody's ideas on how this, you might, any thoughts that you have going forward. So thank you very much.
The reason that I think a lot of land managers and growers use like the business as usual approach is because it is less risky than trying a broader spectrum of things, right? They're going to keep their production still up while they're trying methods. Do you have any thoughts about like where the space is for people to make more progress with experimentation while also using things like production?
Yeah, so this is exactly, that's a very good reason for why that business as usual has been happening. And so in this case, what we're doing is we're taking that burden off of, at least in this case, the managers, right? So the managers are doing something in a certain way. And so we're taking that burden off of them. And we're going, we as a team, we're independently funded, and we get to do this because we're researchers and we don't have to have the same, we're not measured by the same things of like how many acres you've treated and all that stuff, right? And so that's kind of the whole point, is to sort of take it out of take that burden off of those local districts and those kinds of things. And then also, there are a lot of other partnerships kind of worked in with this. And so one of the aspects that I didn't have time to talk about is that we're also partnered with, so one of our partners is the Great Basin Ecoregional program in BLM. And that program has done a lot with contracting, using IDIQ contracts to get the sort of seeds that are of like more local sources and that kind of thing. And so those are kind of off-market systems that we can get these seeds generated, right? And so we're leveraging that stuff, and that's been built in the Great Basin for quite a bit of time. And so now we're being able to leverage all that work that's been done, right? And so I would say if you can figure out a way to sort of kind of offload and take the burden onto yourself from the growers and from the land managers so that they can keep doing what they're doing, but you can show them how to do something different and try that experimentation, and then kind of you can do a process of learning and linking that up. And so if there is something different that works, then they can adopt it.
So thank you for that talk. That was super interesting. So as I understand what you're saying, is essentially it's a conceptual framework you set up to manage land in a different way, right? Which I think is very needed. Part of what you're talking about seems that we would have to have a shift in like the idea that we come in and we restore and fix, and then we kind of go away, and it requires this like ongoing negotiation with the land to understand it. I have two colleagues that would love to speak with you. They're kind of working in the same area. But how do you scale that? So if you take someone like the BLM, you're talking about millions and millions of acres, how do you reframe that and sell that idea to like really big entities? Or can you? Is that the goal?
That's the goal. that's the question, right? So
It's
yeah.
almost, it's just a better relationship with how we see the land through your kind of concepts that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and so this is why I'm giving this presentation, is to do that process of learning. How are we going to connect especially at that, kind of higher levels of BLM, for example, to get support. We have seed money, right? So we were able to kind of write this master study design and start some pilots. But that's our resources right now. That's what we can do. And so, the idea is really to say, hey, let's do this at a big scale. Hopefully Forest Service and BLM can put this into their work. And that's just it's networking and talking to people and, showing them how these concepts might help and really, it's the work of convincing and just being there and, showing up and having relationships, I think is really what it comes down to. So. Thank you.
Do you have anywhere with that?
Yeah.
I don't know. You just have to hold it in your hand. I don't know.
Okay.
Or maybe.
Let's
you
see.
can just leave it there.
Does that work? Is that okay? Check. Does it work? Cool. Yeah, I can hold it. Alrighty.
Great. Our next presenter is Stanley from the Center for Plant Conservation. She'll be talking about regional seed collections initiatives and their network.
Thank you for the introduction. So to explain the Center for Plant Conservation real quick, we're a network of 72 botanical institutions across the U.S., which you can see on that handy little map down there with some partners in Australia, the UK, and Canada as well. Our mission is to safeguard the rare and endangered plants of North America and U.S. territories in long-term ex-situ storage. So as many of you may know, 2 in 5 plants are endangered globally, and there's roughly 4,000 rare and endangered plants in the U.S. Some ways that we, other than just collecting and conserving them ex situ, we also have a lot of research programs and outreach programs to focus on education, getting other people into this field as well. And our best practices kind of consolidate the state of current research in the field. And then we have our regional seed banking initiatives, which we're going to go into. So why is regional seed banking ideal for rare plants? There's a lot of benefits to having these regional collections partnerships. Everyone has a shared flora and conservation rankings. Everyone's got existing familiarity with local land managers, and we can make progress as a whole, and we all already have individual progress with shared stakeholders like government agencies and natural heritage programs. So in California, which is mostly what we're going to focus on, that's the California Native Plant Society. And then targeting as a team allows our network to have more comprehensive collections, starting at the species level and then eventually getting into the population level. So we can ensure all of the species in the region are collected somewhere in the network, and then eventually expand the genetic diversity in collections by focusing on multiple ecoregions and populations for each species. So here's the existing ones in our network right now. All the partners are listed, in these little logos, so I'm not going to read them. But California Plant Rescue is an initiative founded in 2014 by the California Botanic Garden. Our mission is to secure all of the native California species and seed collection, which is 7,500 species, so that's a lot. So we have our starting goal is to focus on the rarest species, which is about 1,200 species. We call them 1B species. That's the California Native Plant Society's rare plant ranking, but you guys just need to know that that's the rarest of the rare in California. Florida Plant Rescue, we founded in the CPC network in 2020. We have 179 Florida native rare plants that we're focusing on. Targeting metrics for that are just any plant in Florida that's G1 or G2, and then also S1 or S2. and being tracked by the Florida Natural Areas Inventory, which is the Natural Heritage Program in Florida. And then lastly, we have a seed banking initiative in Forest Service Region 3, so the Southwest, which began in 2016 and focuses on robust multi-population collections of at-risk species on Forest Service land. So in 2019, California Plant Rescue, which I'm going to call CAPER from now on so you guys know, received $3.6 million from the state to fund seed collections and serve as the state seed bank. It's enough money for 1,000 new seed collections, improving infrastructure at our seed banks, and getting additional rare plant assessments done and databasing. So our goal when we received this funding, at the time there was 1,166 1B species in California, 554 of which were already in collection, and we wanted to get the rest of them in collection. So this graph here shows for all of the rare plants in California, what was the first year that they finally made it into seed collection. And you can see, there was a lot of collections happening, but once CAPER got founded, we really saw like a lot more collections start to happen, and then once we received that funding, it kind of skyrocketed and allowed us to really scale our collections initiatives. So currently there's 977, so 81% of our rare species are in seed collection. 607 of these collections were funded by, since 2019 by the California Biodiversity Initiative. And we have 1,144 total collections, not just rare, not just the funded ones, because people go out, they make their collections, they're like, oh, I see that plant too, I'm gonna go ahead and grab that, even if it's not funded. So we kind of conducted a gap analysis to assess gaps in collections, both before and after we received the funding, and ways that we could improve for the future. So we're gonna talk first at the species level. Receiving funding reduced bias at the species level. We had some disparities in collections based on family and life form, and then apparency, which we're going to go into now. So this pink here is collections that existed for the rarest species from the 12 largest families in California. And we can see that pink, pre-CAPER being founded, there's quite a lot of difference, right here is Crassulaceae, our succulents, have a lot of representation in collection prior to CAPER being founded. So while overall our 1B species are 80% collected, some families are much higher, around 90, and then some are still much lower. Families that are, have other interests for collections, like horticulturally valuable, or people do a lot of research on them, like the succulents, and pretty plants like lilies and mallows and stuff are pretty well represented. So a lot of them were well represented before, and even now they're almost done. Some maybe not quite so attractive, although we all love them. Families are still, not as awesome as the pretty ones, but you can see we've for the mustards, we've really closed that, or closing that gap. So another thing we looked at was life form. We had really coarse categories. We just looked at herbs and then shrubs and trees. And we found 72% of the shrubs and trees in California are currently collected, as compared to 59% of herbs. And we can see, the woody perennials are a lot easier to find in the field year after year, making them easier to collect. And they also may have increased interest for collection in gardens. The apparency we looked at was stem length, because it's easier to find tall plants. If you're going out to look for them, you can see them easier. You might not see this guy unless you're crawling around and you really, really know already where the population is. So we found tall plants are better represented in collections. Prior to CAPER being founded, this dark one here is the tall plants. They were much better collected, and post-CAPER, we have really been collecting the little guys to close that gap. And uncollected species still are largely made up of short herbs, but we've been closing that gap, and we will continue to do so. So next we'll talk about population level bias. Population level bias hasn't really changed at this point because we're still at the stage of making sure all of the species made it into collection with at least one population. But some reasons we found might be affecting population level bias is it's just a lot easier to access certain kinds of lands, and permitting really affects what gets collected more than anything. It's, we have like a network-wide permit to collect on Forest Service lands, so we can access, if we know a species exists on a national forest near us, probably gonna go get that population. And then there's just geographic bias, because gardens are more likely to collect populations closest to them first, and a lot of our gardens are located in Southern California. Like I mentioned earlier, they also will make opportunistic collections, so if they're going to collect a population near them, they're probably gonna collect another population near them. But we have a lot of efforts to reduce that bias, and so we're seeing before funding here, you can see before we started really getting to fund newer collectors, this green dot here, that's California Botanic Garden, so they're kind of a powerhouse in collections, and they're located around here, which you can kind of tell because that's where they make most of their collections. Once we received the funding, we were able to really scale up some of our smaller collectors, providing them with infrastructure funding so they can get out there and they can afford to make the collections because they're being paid to do so. We see that Northern California really fills in a lot better, and we're seeing more both species and populations of species that exist in both areas are getting collected in the north. So currently 51% of our 1B species have only one element occurrence present in collection. And then only 7% of them have 5 populations or more conserved in collection. So in making priorities for recollection, we're gonna focus on, first and foremost, collecting species in all of the ecoregions in which they occur. And then also just making sure we get those 93% of other rare species get more populations in collection. So we have a database tool that we're going to be really improving to help people target species that haven't been collected at all of their occurrences yet, or more than 5 because they can't really be collected all of them. And then we have our occurrences data provided by the California Natural Biodiversity Database, synthesized with our collections data existing from our partners. And we'll do kind of a walkthrough of how that helps people target. So we have our map here where people can see all of the species in California, all of the occurrences we have data for, and then all of the accessions we know about. And you can make little filters to see, so you can filter by taxonomy and then rarity and listing status. You can see what's been collected, what hasn't, what's eligible for funding, and where existing collections are, and if it has been collected, where and when. You can see for landowners, you can filter to know, by broad categories and then specific, which we'll go into in a second, and then geographic. So if you know I'm in San Diego County, I want to collect something in San Diego County, you can see what's near you. So a quick example here, if I know I'm near Los Padres National Forest and I have a permit with the Forest Service, I can filter for that. I can see, doing all of the wrong buttons. 15 species on Los Padres National Forest are uncollected, and 51 occurrences are uncollected. And then I can zoom in and see if I'm, by Santa Barbara, there's one right next to me there. And then we can see of those 15 species that exist, 12 of them are rare there. So this allows us to create summaries for landowners, or by landowner for stakeholders. We can see that 45% of 1B species that exist on Forest Service land have been collected at Forest Service occurrences. And then for BLM, 36%, and for the Park Service, 27%. Then you can also target by specific taxa. So we go back to our less than attractive mustards. We can see that there's 28 species of rare uncollected mustards that we can focus on. So next steps, as we mentioned earlier, some of our smaller gardens or collections, collectors have been able to grow a lot with the infrastructure support, and we've also been able to better protect old existing collections with better facilities and technology. And here's just a quick example, like pre-caper, Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz. This was their rare collections, and then once we received funding, they just, again, skyrocketed. So Florida Plant Rescue is a very young initiative. It's modeled on caper. It's growing. 78 of the 179 priority species have been collected in at least one population, and then 12 of them have been collected at 5 populations. In our first pilot season in 2021, we collected 9 species. In 2022, we really ramped up and collected 22. And then this year, we're contracted to collect 20. So here's all of our partners again, and everyone who has contributed so much to this work. And that's what I have. Yeah.
Hi, so I realize California is a dry state and probably a lot of your seed is orthodox, but are you collecting any recalcitrant seed? And I know that must be an issue for Florida.
Yeah, so for Florida, we actually have a special subset funding, exceptional species research and collections. And we also have a similar thing in California. Obviously, it's not, as you mentioned, as much of an issue, but we do have our oaks and stuff. So that is something that we do focus on, we do look into. If a partner wants to collect a exceptional species, they just have to tell us, what's your plan to look into it, make sure that everyone's doing the research to really nail down how to conserve them best. But yeah.
Once the caper money became available, was there a lot of challenges about just scaling up? I mean, it was that one table you showed where the collection just skyrocketed. I just imagine the implementation of that must have been challenging.
Yeah, so I wasn't around then, but I mean, I was, anyways. I'm not 3 years old, but I think a lot of the funding to expand infrastructure, giving people trucks to go out into the field and seed banking facilities even. We also have expeditions that happen every now and then. So earlier, or I guess last summer, there was an expedition up to the Modoc Plateau in Northern California because we knew we didn't have so many species in Northern California. We wanted to close that gap, and so a bunch of partners got together. Everyone went up there for a week or 2 and just tried to collect all the species up there. So it has been challenging, but there's 10 partners, and some of them have been in the game for ages, like California Botanic Garden. They really help out each other and make sure that everyone feels comfortable doing what they're doing. But yeah.
What was the name of that software you used to track and target specific species again?
That's ours. So that's the Center for Plant Conservation's database. And the one that you can see here, this is just available to our collectors right now because it's sensitive data. But we'll be creating similar databases for our other initiatives. Right now there's just one for California, but we'll have a Florida one and other potential regional ones. But our collections data for caper is available on the CMPS website, their rare plant inventory. If you ever want to see if a California plant is held in collection, you can search that. But yeah, this specific database is a secret little baby for the network. Sorry. Yeah.
Can I adopt a mustard?
Actually, you can, not for caper. The problem with a lot of the species that haven't been collected yet is that they're harder to collect. So that's not totally the case for mustards, but for a lot of the remaining 1B species, it's we don't really know if that population exists anymore. There's only 2 populations, and they're sad. But yeah.
Are there plans? You've got all these seeds now, but as far as getting them back into the landscape to restore the populations?
Not yet. That's something we're looking into as expanding the programs of the network. But right now we're just focusing on just getting everything into collection at least once. And then for older collections, we just started this year funding recollections for species that had inadequate, so small collections and old collections, to get recollected to make sure that that seed stays fresh and good. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'll ask another one.
Oh.
So it's wonderful you've got all this cooperation with all these, government agencies that say, sure, come collect seed on our property of all these rare species, because I would imagine that's not the case everywhere, that some places they're a little bit more uptight about that. So.
And we're really lucky because there is so much public land in California, and we're able to, figure that out.
Do you ever run into a situation where a private landowner says, I don't want you looking for rare species in my property, collecting seed there, because I don't want to become subject to some kind of regulatory restrictions on the use of my land because of that?
Yeah, I think that, so the kind of bias that we're thinking is happening with the private collections that we're aware of is that if someone knows a rare species occurs on their land and they tell the database, the CNDDB, that this occurrence exists on my land, they probably have good intentions. They probably want it saved. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't tell anyone, and we otherwise wouldn't really know to go look there. So I'm sure that there are a lot. I'm sure that is an issue. It's just not one we totally know about because the occurrences we know of are people who want us there. So, yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
This room is not as full as it has been. I'm sure it's not because I'm about to give the most riveting talk that you guys have been here. Sorry. Try to make it so that the rattle is that good?
Yes.
Can you guys hear? Okay. I'm sure I'll also be the person that can't run the clicker because that's the way they all are.
You'll do great. Our last presenter for this session is Stefanie Wacker. Did I say it right?
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
From the National Park Service. And she's going to be talking about building a robust seed network for the national parks.
All right, thank you. Thank you guys for staying. We'll make this hopefully interesting so that you can go to lunch after this. I want to first acknowledge that Katie VinZant's my co-author, and she's also in the audience, so she will help me with any questions that you guys have. And I'm going to talk about how the National Park Service is going to start increasing their seed supply with the cooperation of all of you fine folks, because as we've learned repeatedly, we can't do this alone, and there is a significant amount of restoration and not enough seed to do it with. So, okay. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the history or background of the National Park Service. So we have 424 park units as of today. I think last week there was discussion of adding a couple more to our system. You may know these as national parks, national monuments, national lake shores, seashores. They come with a whole bunch of designations, but we all try to operate under the same mission, and so for this talk, I'm just going to call them all parks. So just assume that I'm not talking about things just called national parks. We have over 85 million acres across the entire U.S., including the District of Columbia and all of our territories. So we have a lot of land that is segregated. Some parks are very large, some are very small, and so we have the challenge of trying to come up with plans and strategies that cover the gamut from the Death Valleys of 4 million acres, the things in the Arctic, Yellowstone, all the way down to the small parks that we have that people don't frequently visit and are generally not on calendars and postcards. We have a mission that states that we are going to protect our natural and cultural resources for the current and future generations. And part of that mission requires us to use native plants to do our restorations whenever it is possible and conceivable to do so. The exceptions of note probably are cultural plants, so think like cherry blossoms or something like that, where they're not necessarily a native plant, but it's a very culturally significant to the area. And then also turf grasses. If you've walked up and down the mall while you've been here, we couldn't possibly come up with a native analog for all of that turf that gets walked on and so heavily tread upon. So instances like that, we're not going to use a native plant, but when we're looking at some large expanses, particularly of our parks in the west that are big natural resource parks, we're always going to try to use native plants. So in the history of parks doing restoration, we've generally been very park-centric, meaning that each unit is going to do all of the restoration. They do it on their own with their current staff. They don't really partner with a lot of people. It's very non-collaborative, small scale. So this is like project limited, unless it's a large restoration. There's a few parks that are doing like go-back lands that have lots and lots of acres that they're trying to do massive restorations on. But a lot of them are things like sewer lines, right? You need to put a new sewer line into something, a flood wipes out your north entrance road, something like that. So you have these scales that go from very small to something very large. Often they're limited funding, so when you put a project together in the Park Service, one of the line items is funding for plant restoration. In my experience, it's almost always the first one that gets knocked off when you go cost overrun. So it is one of those things where we need to start embracing that as a line item in funding and projects, and every single one of them has to have it in there. We, in the past, have relied very heavily on our NRCS partners with the plant materials centers. They did a lot of seed increase for us, and then we've lost that partnership recently. I'm really not expert in knowing why that is, and so I can't really answer the whys and if that's ever coming back. And we've also not really embraced the seed transfer zone approach, meaning that let's look at our eco-region and get seed from here and use it over here. Parks generally have been doing it within only their park boundaries. I was an ecologist at Yellowstone for several years, and we had a pretty strict rule of how far away we would go for a project, and it wasn't far, like half a mile. That's the only thing we're going to get seed from to do that project. And so it becomes very restrictive if you think only like that. And then finally, seed was considered NPS property, and we weren't really inclined to share that. And so with kind of realizing how big of a problem this is, we're going to start, hopefully, we're going to start convincing our colleagues that this isn't really the way that's the best approach of handling these large restoration needs. So much that we've heard about so far at this meeting, along comes a little bit of magic called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that gave an IRA, thank you. I don't know the acronyms, right? It's the federal government alphabet soup. I can't remember what they all are. So there's some money that's coming into the system now, right, to start implementing some of what we need to do. This catalyzed the National Park Service into looking at how do we need to reinvigorate our seed strategy and our native plant restoration. So that caused kind of a big thought exercise that is going to implement this seed strategy across the National Park Service. So try to bring us out of those silos and really work across ecoregions, that kind of thing. This obviously is going to be an emphasis on collaboration. I think we've been hearing it a ton, right? We just simply cannot be doing this alone in a vacuum. If we rely so heavily on our outside partners, particularly seed growers, seed collectors, NPS doesn't have the staff to do this all for our own lands. We really, really heavily rely on others. We need to start sharing our resources. That's from our people as well as our information, expertise, that kind of stuff. Where NPS is going to start formalizing our participation in the Seeds of Success program. We heard that on the plenary on Monday from BLM, that there's an MOU that's about to be signed. And so that's going to formalize our participation with that. We're also looking at opening up NPS lands to seed collection. So before we've had our borders pretty tight. We still have to have permission and require permits. So like we are the federal government. The permitting, I know it seems bureaucratic, but it's also our way of tracking of what is coming and going out of the park. And so this helps us also maintain where our genetics is going, knowing what's happening with some of our partners. We're going to increase and do more research in developing these seed transfer zones. So which parks are in which zone and how do we help build those for our parks who may or may not have the staff to do that themselves. And then finally, we need to do this all in a climate smart manner. So what seeds are we looking at? What species can be our workhorses under climate change? And then how do we start using the seeds kind of genetic material for adaptive migration? So we have articulated these 3 goals out of that exercise, which was to identify our seed needs, to increase our quantity of seed, and then to develop our partnerships and collaborations. And this may sound exactly like the National Seed Strategy. Some wonderful folks put a lot of work into that document, and now the National Park Service is going to fully embrace it because we have this opportunity to start doing so. I would just like to bring up a picture of, this is the kind of temporary north entrance road in Yellowstone. So I don't know if you guys heard in the spring, they had a 500-year flood event that wiped out the north entrance, which is one of the more important economically because the concessionaires run a lot of stuff out of there, particularly in the winter. It's the only one that's, or not the only one, but it's one that's open. And so they took a previously used carriage road, paved it, and turned it into the entrance. And this required a massive amount of seed to do restoration. To talk about these goals individually, we need to identify our seed needs across regions and parks. And what we want to do first is focus on our priority ecosystems. So we've talked about sagebrush today. I've heard it from several people that big sage ecosystems are in peril community. MPS has some sage lands with sagebrush on them. And how do we start doing the restoration that we need to do that? And the restoration on some of those lands is from invasive species. So we have invasives or invasions that need to be reseeded back into native communities. And then we also have stuff like the last slide, which had infrastructure building and that kind of restoration. We want to look at eco-regional collaborations, so things within the MPS boundaries. We have parks that are called like Southeast Utah Group or the Southern Colorado Group. Like those kind of parks naturally fit together. We need to start looking at some of the parks that don't necessarily have those kind of service designations, if you will. And then also ensuring the reliable availability of genetically appropriate seed. That's obviously preaching to the choir, right? Collecting, production, and keeping a stock available so that when we have things like roads that wash out, we're not having to buy seed off the marketplace that is maybe genetically not as appropriate, but we are in an emergency situation. So having those hundreds of pounds of seed that can kind of continually be cycled through projects. We've probably seen this map before. This is the red is where the seeds of success collections are been. There's some yellow in here of where park units are. Again, kind of missing right here. And so with the National Park Service too, engaging in this, we can start doing collections in some of our missing areas. Also, again, the seed transfer zones to try to take this information and supply it to our parks. So part of the Park Service, because we're such a large agency across the country, not every park has an ologist for every single discipline. It's like there's one ologist for all the disciplines. And so some of this is that we need to help our parks out with these kind of information. Goal 2 is building enduring capacity. So again, these are the same things we've been talking about. We're going to help develop and curate our best management practices, put hubs together where parks can share storage, grow out facilities, that kinds of things. And then also parks can leverage contracts and agreements. This is a difficult process in the park. If you're someone that contracts with the government and it's cumbersome, we also think it's cumbersome on us on our side because we have to write these and try to get them to a broad audience. And sometimes they're just overly prescriptive, and so they're so narrow that no one can really take advantage of them. This map shows some of our park units, and then the circles are where we're doing collections, and then the squares, we have storage. So you can kind of see they're in their large natural resource parks only in the west, and we're missing, again, this middle part of the nation. And then finally, goal 3 is to share our procurement instruments like IDIQs, blanket purchase agreements and contracts, and that's with other agencies, right? So MPS is writing one, BLM is writing one, Forest Service is writing one. Like, let's see if we can start streamlining that process and make it less cumbersome on the government side, as well as for the partners that we're trying to have, grow out and do procurement stuff with. We need to collaborate on our seed collection, which we're doing a lot of with Seeds of Success. Collaborate on lists of species that work for many areas or easy to increase. I've heard this from several places. I've seen some good posters of some research that's being done on what these are. And these are, I think, are really useful because we can come up with these dream lists of species that ecologists love, and it's all pretty, but can we grow it out? Can we collect it? What's the seed viability? How long can you hold it in storage? So what are the seed dormancy rules? That kind of things. The information is all out there. We just need to get it all together. And then obviously we need to share this through publications, hopefully meetings like this kind of stuff, and then also within the National Park Service itself to bring it in a place where everyone can access it. We did get some accomplishments in the last fiscal year. So Bill funded some projects, which included some seed collection in 19 parks, seed production to support 20 park units. We collaborated with our regional seed networks and partners. Obviously, the Seeds of Success was a big thing for us to formally recognize that relationship. And then we've used some matching funds with fellow federal partners to do increase on production fields. And then finally, this is like, what are our next steps? So Katie and I are working on things like to build comprehensive toolkits that will help our parks that don't have a large capacity to do this work. We help them figure out how to do it in their parks. We build a restoration practitioner network within the Park Service, so we bring all of the minds together. The experiences start to become shared. We're not duplicating efforts. We've learned from each other's mistakes, that kind of stuff. And then ultimately to partner with external people, and that's where I beg of all of you to keep the Park Service in mind for when you're doing any kind of your work where the MPS can be a partner. We are looking for those relationships to help our parks, and all of which I may add are your parks. This is Public Lands of America, one of the great treasures. So when you do experience your America, know that that's what you're sharing, is that we're trying to protect that for yours and future generations. Anything else? Questions? Katie will answer them. Yeah.
So just a thought, one thing, maybe this already exists. Is there any standardization of like accessioning seed, of like inventory data sheets, seed collection data forms?
I'm going to go out and say no. This may shock you. That doesn't even happen within a park. So I worked in Yellowstone. I don't even know that there's a record of that. I can tell you all the accessions I've made and collected, all in my mind. Some of it just went rough clean and I threw it back out on the ground because that's the only thing I was trying to do was take the seed that's over there and did it where they put a toilet in or a comfort station in that summer. It needs to be reseeded, and so all I did is walk over there and grab some and put it over here. So no, it definitely doesn't happen, certainly not within the Park Service, and I would say not within some parks. Some parks are excellent at it, though. There's, I think Glacier has an exceptional record and monitoring and all that. So it's really been a park-to-park situation.
It seems like a lot of parks are still practicing really restrictive sourcing, like you're describing with the half-mile radius.
Mm-hmm.
Are you finding that even parks that have biologists and ecologists, how receptive are they to switching to more of a broad-scale seed transfer zone?
I think that you're right. We do have a bit of personality-driven type of collection. I would dare say that with the amount of need for that we are starting to broaden up. It's so hard to do some of what we do, and if you're at a small park that has, just doesn't have massive restoration needs, like collecting that, getting it, finding someone to collect it, procure, all of those steps are cost prohibitive, and so I think we're just being forced into that situation, and we should be. I mean, we've kind of, I think the time has come where we just can't be that restrictive anymore. But we do want to be somewhat restrictive, right? I mean, we don't want to just put stuff from way on the other side of the country and it doesn't belong there. But sharing within groups of parks, like within an ecoregion, that makes sense.
We're seeing more and more people being open to that. Just need to explain it.
Yeah, and education, maybe that's our goal too, is education of our colleagues. Oh, absolutely, right? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then what I think of that is the parks that have one person, right? There's one person that does all of the natural resource work in that park. They just don't have the capacity to come up with those kind of policies. And so that's what Katie and I do, is like we help them with that. We give them the guidelines so that they know where to do their thinking, right? We just cut down a lot of the work for them. So, hi, Amy?
Who decides what ecosystems are priority?
Katie? Ooh, I passed the buck. Did you see that?
I don't make those decisions.
Yeah.
No, I mean, part of, the recent funding that we've gotten for Bill, there were very clear keystone initiatives, habitat types, and that was decided by the Department of the Interior. Right? But that was Bill. What about IRA? IRA for NPS does not have those restrictions, does not have the keystone issue against this. So it is more of a collaborative effort on what we see are the projects that are in those themes.
We got time for one more.
Oh.
We're out.
Just something to think about is you're planning for more broad scale sharing, but just the tribal concerns about some of the species that are in the parks. I'm most familiar with Yosemite, but the Yosemite tribes really have a sacred sense to the black oaks in the area, and I think that would be a mistake to think, well, we could just take the black oak acorns and distribute it along the western portions of the Sierras. I think incorporating that tribal voice into how the parks move forward with seed sharing and importation of seed would be really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just think tribal consultation on everything, and so those words forgot to come out of my mouth. But yes, the tribes are consulted on most things, but it is absolutely to take the native knowledge as well as the concerns of those things, I think are 100% involved in what we're going to do. So, thank you guys for coming. Enjoy.